massively, but we're going to bring everybody in here. We have Ben Palmer, we have Scott Pianowski, Matt Kovac, and Renee. Oh no, I had it before. It's the Deschert.
No, it's just Deckard.
No.
It's a German thing. I
Deckard.
don't know what my
Deckard.
family was doing, but that's what they came up with. So the CH sounds
I wanted
like
to say
it's-
Descartes, but I was like, it's not Descartes. I knew this. I asked you when I first met you, and I should have remembered that. But anyway, Renee Deckard, thank you all so much for being here. We're going to talk about baseball books, and I need this. I need the recommendation. So looking forward to this one. Thanks for being here.
What's up? I'm still, man, I didn't know about Dandy, the mascot, that he existed. And I'm still kind of shaken that he looked the way he did. I don't know if you guys saw it. That was a little scary. What's up, everybody? My name's Ben. What's up, Scott, Renee, Matt? We are going to talk about some baseball books. So here's how I'm going to do this. I got a list of 10 baseball books from Scott and from Renee that are among their favorites. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through that list, and we'll have everybody just kind of talk about the books. So everybody who's watching, get your Goodreads up so you can add some books to your want to read list, because there are some good ones on here. First book I want to start with is a book that was on both of your lists, and a book that I think everyone's like, oh, when they think of baseball books, they think of this book, which is Moneyball. Also one of the best baseball movies ever made. So what's the pitch on Moneyball? That's, I don't know. I mean, everyone's heard of Moneyball. And so I feel like talking about saying like, hey, Moneyball's good is sort of like saying like, hey, Mount Everest is kind of tall. So what's the pitch? Scott, we'll start with you on Moneyball.
Yeah, welcome to everybody to the panel. I don't know how we're ever going to follow up the mascot draft. I didn't see the whole thing. I hope the San Diego Chicken was selected. If it wasn't, I'm going to storm the PitchCon castle and
as you should,
get his just due. Yeah, Moneyball, right? It's about exposing an inefficiency in the market, right? The Oakland A's figuring out that on-base percentage was underpriced in baseball. Also, in the book and in the movie, it does a really good job of ignoring the fact that the A's had 3 freaking starting pitchers who were like Cy Young candidates year in, year out. The movie also doesn't mention that Miguel Tejada won the MVP that famous 20-win season. No, it's about Scott Hatteberg. But I love the movie. I wrote a review of the movie and said it's not a home run, but it gets on base. And that's kind of the ethos of Moneyball, right? Is how do we don't have the payroll, or we don't have the salary, the salary in our coffers to go out and get the best team financially. So how can we spend our money the most efficiently, and how can we really just be smarter about assembling our team? It's a book you should reread every few years, and it's also, I think, a really good movie. Philip Seymour Hoffman in a part role. He's my favorite actor of all time, and so I endorse heartily the book and the movie Moneyball.
I need to come in very quickly. Scott, you have to put your mic into your you got to twist the mic so you're talking into it as opposed to the side.
Sure.
Because I want to hear that voice beautifully.
Yeah,
and we'll just straight through the top of it. I'm so sorry. Please
No,
continue.
It's okay, Nick. We forgive you. This time, don't let it happen again. Or we will leave and there will be dead air for an hour. All right. Anyway, so we have a lot of books to get to. I don't want to go too tangent, but yes, Scott, I have actually, so believe it or not, and here I am hosting a baseball books panel. I've never read Moneyball, but I need to. The movie is fabulous. I will strongly recommend that. Renee, what is it you love about Moneyball?
So let me say one thing before this. When I was preparing for this panel, one of the things I realized is I've read a lot of baseball books, but there are a lot more baseball books I haven't read. So I hope everybody will leave in the comments and in the chat recommendations for us to read, because that's really what I'm always looking for, is more
Absolutely.
stuff to read.
Please do. And also, I will tweet out your guys' lists. So if anyone, misses a book or whatever, wants something to add to their list, I'll tweet it out so everyone has the list.
So I'm going to take a little bit different approach to it than Scott did. And I agree with everything Scott has to say, although I think Moneyball is a less good movie than you all do. But I just think Michael Lewis is one of the greatest nonfiction writers that we have right now. And Michael Lewis has the ability to make complicated things very accessible. And he's able to illustrate those complicated principles by using really interesting characters and telling stories about them. And I think beyond sort of the sabermetric side, he gives you this cast of characters that you become really invested in, which is what he does really well as you follow their stories through. And for me, one of the flaws of the book is the book just sort of falls in love with, or the film just falls in love with Brad Pitt, because why wouldn't you fall in love with Brad Pitt? And it reduces all those interesting side stories that made that character really interesting, right? But Michael Lewis has said that his superpower is he can get anybody to just talk to him and tell him stuff if he's persistent long enough. And I think that shows in Moneyball. It's just, I agree with Scott. If you're a serious baseball fan, you need to reread that one every year or two. And one other note, the audiobook is fabulous. Lewis reads it. He's so funny. It's like you're having a beer with somebody. So cannot recommend that one enough.
Fabulous. Matt, any thoughts on Moneyball?
I have to agree with Renee. If the audio book is much better than the actual book, having Mike Lewis push that out there is really good. When I read my baseball books, I look more for history, and I see more of a discussion in time. But I don't see much of the. For me, what I got was it wasn't about how the game was shifting. He didn't talk much about that. And that was really the important part. I think Moneyball is sort of like right around that when baseball shifted. And he didn't give there wasn't a lot of discussion in that. There wasn't a lot of discussion in the book. But that wasn't what Mike Lewis does. So, but that's what I sort of take away. I wish there would have been more talk about how the game is really changing and how Billy Beane doing this helped change the game, because he put it differently and people started using it. And that sort of really started changing the game. Yet he completely ignored the pitching, like Scott said. That team was awesome because they had awesome pitching. And even like the relievers were not, they got the relievers just by we got somebody off the junk pile for the most part. And got it to that far. And then there wasn't a lot of discussion about why it doesn't work in the playoffs, which even Billy Beane goes, my shit doesn't work in the playoffs. And there wasn't that discussion about it. And that for me leaves that book a little bit wanting, but it is a pretty good movie. But I can't believe Paul Giamatti was not in Hoffman's place, because, if your dad's the former commissioner of baseball, you should be able to get in a baseball movie.
Look, I wouldn't want to replace Philip Seymour Hoffman in anything. But I want to move on to the other book that was on both of your lists, Scott and Renee, which is Jim Bouton's Ball 4. I would love to hear, we'll start, Renee, we'll go with you first. Jim Bouton's Ball 4, what put it on your list?
So it's a work of its time, which is the 1970s. So I'm going to leave you with that caveat. If you haven't read this one yet, get the audiobook, because the foreword is written is told by his now wife. And when they met, she was not his wife. And so it explains how that relationship evolved. And she really sets up what's going to happen in Ball 4. But it's just this great inside look. It really captures a particular moment in time. And so much of what we read of baseball is about sort of the heroes and the real standouts. That's not what Bouton is after. It is awesome. But it's like watching movies from the 70s. You've got these moments when you're like, man, I don't know. So yeah.
Great. Scott, Jim Bouton's Ball 4. How about you? Scott, you are muted, my friend. No, like you're muted on StreamYard. There is probably a mute button at the bottom. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's all good.
I knew.
And he's gone again.
And he's gone again. We lost you.
Oh, God.
There you are. I hear you.
Can you hear me?
I hear you.
We can hear you now.
Perfect.
Man, I'm going to need an audiobook to make up for this video for this
It's
hour
all
here.
good. It's all good.
So I was an English major, so I'm supposed to have all these fancy schmancy books I tell you to read. Ball 4 is my favorite book of all time. Not my favorite baseball book, not my favorite sports book. My favorite book, because it's a story, it's a well-observed story about somebody who, Jim Bouton is literally and figuratively a knuckleballer. He's a guy who can't throw his fastball anymore. He's trying to hang on by his fingernails with the knuckleball. He pitches for an expansion team, a collection of cast-offs, and then he gets traded. A little spoiler here. He gets traded late in the season. So he gets to see the American League, the National League. It's an expansion year. And he's different. He's a guy who went to college and he's playing a sport which is mostly not college educated people. He's seen as an oddball. He's seen as a thinker. He's seen as a eccentric. He's not particularly well liked, even though at times he does things to try to be well liked. So I always thought people talk about Ball Four. Oh, it's it's an expose and it's so funny and it's so raunchy. Although it's it's raunchy by 1969 terms, it would be it wouldn't be raunchy by HBO terms today or anything like that. But I love the book because of what it says about group dynamics and about human nature and about what it's like to want to belong to a group, even though you're kind of different than everybody else in the group. You'll recognize a lot of the names. Lou Piniella's in the book and Mike Marshall's in the book, who won a Cy Young Award in the 70s. And if you do buy the book, buy Ball for the Final Pitch, because it was published by Boughton. So I believe the proceeds would go to his family. And it has all the updates. It has him coming back to make a comeback. He makes it back to the major leagues in age 38, I want to say, in 1978 with the Braves. He invents a bunch of things. He fails at a lot of things. He's in a movie. He's in a movie with Elliot Gould. Anyway, Jim Boughton is just a fascinating guy. I also want to mention my brother. My little brother wrote a letter to Jim Boughton when he was 13 or 14. He was definitely too young to read Ball for with some of the subject matter, but he wrote a letter to Boughton anyway. Boughton writes back a handwritten letter and gave my little brother some swag. He's been holding that over my head for basically our entire adult lives. And, Boughton passed away a few years ago. I always wanted to meet him or even send him a letter of my own. I never did any of those things. It's a big regret for me. But this is a wonderful book. It's funny. It's smart. It's perceptive. And again, you could teach it in a human psychology class or a group dynamics class because it really works well in that area too.
That's awesome. I'll be honest, I've never read that one either, and I don't think so. One of the big uses of this panel for me personally is my dad's a huge reader, and he's read a lot of baseball books. He loves baseball books, so this is like Christmas shopping for like the next 5-6 years. I'm just gonna buy him books off this list he hasn't read. So this is fantastic, Matt. Ball 4. It seemed you by your reaction, I got the feeling you're a big fan as well.
I loved Ball 4 because if you read a lot of books, he sort of helped change that mentality of let's not make them heroes, let's make them real people. And that to me was really important. And I read it in high school and did a book report on it and got a detention because of what was in there, mainly because I mentioned the beaver shots, which he mentions inside there. And so I got a detention at a Sabre convention one time in Seattle. I got the opportunity to meet him, and I told him that I got a detention because I read his book when I was 14. And he ended up buying me a beer and we had a great conversation just about baseball and how his book changed things. And, like a lot of things Scott said, he was this college educated guy and a bunch of people that really weren't. And he looked at it different. And that's what he expressed in the book. And I think that was really interesting. Plus, he invented Big League Chew, which is my favorite gum. So it was nice. I met him. I think it's a wonderful book and everybody should read it.
Amazing. I mean, 5 stars from everybody. It sounds like that's fantastic. All right. So those are the only 2 books that are on both of your lists. I want to talk about each of your lists individually. We have a lot of books to go through, so I'm going to go through them. And I want to start with a book that was on Renee's list that is also, if I remember correctly, my dad's favorite baseball book, which is Where Nobody Knows Your Name by John Feinstein. So tell me, Renee, why is that on your list?
So Feinstein tracks a minor league team. Well, he doesn't track a minor league team. He tracks a series of players who are involved in a minor league through a season. And some of them don't make it. He follows an umpire who's trying to make it to the big leagues. The umpire doesn't make it. I really like stories that show you people on the fringes of baseball and show you the kinds of decisions they're making and what they're up against. It's another one of those really important books that helped illustrate the importance of helping out to address the issues that were going on in minor league baseball. I think we're still working through those. It's just very readable. It's really just a case study. And in a similar vein, I can't remember the author's name, but she self-published it on Amazon, and it's called I Shouldn't Have Gotten Up Today. And her son played baseball at Stanford. And it's essentially an oral history of a bunch of his teammates as they go into minor leagues. There's a very rich genre of writing there, and I think we probably don't talk about it enough. But what does your dad like about it, Ben?
That is a great question. it's one of those things where like he's been like, you should read this book, and then I'm like, yeah, and he just loves the book. He does a lot of the stuff you mentioned. Like the he talks a lot about I think the access that Feinstein had, and just kind of like the deep dive the book is into the minor leagues. I remember him saying it was just fascinating to read. So it's one of those books that's like on my ever growing, very long list of one day I'll read these books, which grows longer and longer by the day because I dream of a future in which I have time to read more books.
Yeah, that's you said access. That's a very Feinstein model, right? I mean, his famous book is the most famous of several sports books he's written. He's written like 30 of them or something. Is A Season on the Brink. I haven't read the book that Renee mentioned, but I've read a lot of Feinstein books. So he goes to Indiana basketball in the 1985-86 season, spends a year with Bobby Knight in Bloomington. He wrote a couple of books about PGA Tour, going on the road with those guys. He did an Army-Navy football rivalry book where he basically, was in the huddles and in the locker rooms. That's basically what Feinstein does. And I've read a lot of his books. I've read A Season on the Brink several times. I've read his golf book several times. His one-on-one book is really, really good. So
he also had a book about the Baltimore Ravens.
He did.
Man Up.
Yep.
Which is very cool too.
So Feinstein's one of the finest sports writers. Not everything he writes lands with me, but he's a great college basketball writer and he's really good. This is kind of really his thing, right? It's just to become the hanger on, to become the fly on the wall, the invisible person after a while, because eventually people just forget he's there, and then he observes what he writes. So it's I'm definitely going to have that high up on my list.
Yeah. Also, shout out to Paul in the chat. Audiobooks, yes, that is something I need to take advantage of more, because it is a lot easier sometimes to listen than to, if you don't have time for reading. So that is something a train that people have told me to hop on that I have yet to hop on yet. That was a bad sentence. Matt, where Nobody Knows Your Name. Have you read it? Your thoughts?
I have read that, and I love Feinstein stuff. That book was good. I mean, it was one of his averages books. The Season on the Brink, I just think, is Feinstein at his best. But I did find the book because I love hearing those little stories that you just don't hear. And that's what I really appreciate. And there's a lot of books that do that. But Feinstein does a really good job. If you're looking at a book and it says John Feinstein on it, it's about baseball, there's a pretty good chance it's going to be a good book. But I like Season on the Brink better.
All right, Scott, I want to talk about a book that's on your list, The Baseball 100 by Joe Posnanski. God, I goofed that up. My bad, Joe, if you're out there. Baseball 100. Scott, what put it on your list?
It's so good. I bought this book several times for friends of mine. And now I have to buy another copy because my dog chewed up my copy. I wasn't sure if I could send a photo, maybe a tweet to Posnanski, and he would take pity on me. But it's essays on the 100 greatest players in baseball. And Joe finds an interesting hook and an interesting story to tell, although a lot of the stories kind of overlap. There's a lot of family lineage, a lot of fathers and sons in there. But and no matter how well you know the player he's writing about, there's going to be stuff in there you don't know about. And a lot of it is really poignant. Some of it is heartbreaking, because to be a professional athlete a lot of times means sacrifices in other areas. Sometimes you're fulfilling out a dream that your father had. Sometimes you had a bad childhood or something like that. So Joe's just a great storyteller, and he gets into the weeds on what made these players interesting, what made them great, what made them tragic. And it's also a great book that, a lot of these books we mentioned, you would read, A to Z, you'd start at page 1 and you just read whatever. This is a book you can just jump around. You just open it up and go, oh, okay, I'll just read about Ken Griffey Jr. today, or I'll read about Ted Williams today, or I'll read about Sandy Koufax today. And so you don't have, you can read the book in any order you want. It's just a great book to have on your coffee table. You just got something to eat. You sit down with a bowl of soup or whatever your dinner is, and settle up to that book and read it in any order you like. I can't imagine anybody who loves baseball not loving this book.
Yeah, I mean that sounds pretty. I would imagine it's got to be a pretty big book, right?
It's huge. Yeah, he wrote these essays in The Athletic. So
I remember. Yeah, I remember reading some of them. I didn't realize
people out there may already be familiar with the book and not even realize it, because he was writing these essays and people are like, "This is a book, man. Put this all in a book."
Yeah.
And he's thinking, well, it's going to be a lot of trees killed. It's a huge book. It can be a really good doorstop if you need it. But it's interesting because I like Posnanski. Sometimes he's a little bit too Pollyanna-ish for me, but this is him at his best. And he's coming out with another baseball book. I guess he just finished it. it should be out, I don't know, sometime in the next 7 or 8 months. Maybe it's even next year, about baseball moments. So that's his sweet spot. Joe's done I'm envious of what he's been able to do, which is cultivate a career where he gets to write a lot about history, and he doesn't have to write necessarily as much about what's going on today, although he also does that too. Because I think I'll admit this. One of my flaws. It's a feature or bug. You can decide. But sometimes I think like 1970s and 1980s stuff is more interesting to me than what's going on today. I guess that's getting old. But when Posnanski talks about history, and I'm just a documentary buff and history buff anyway, so I can't recommend this book enough. It's not cheap, although you can probably buy a used copy now, or maybe go to your local library. But I think anybody who hasn't explored this writing will really enjoy it.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I've read a few of his essays when they came out in The Athletic, and they were great. So I can only imagine all of them. By the way, I want to mention to the rest of you on the panel, feel free to jump in whatever you want. We don't have to make this as like super structured. This can be kind of like laid back and loosey goosey as much as we want it to be. So if you guys have any thoughts on the Baseball 100, jump in.
Go ahead, Renee.
No, please, Matt, go ahead.
Okay. Well, since Joe Podolsky, we grew up in the same area. We are about the same age, and we grew up loving Dwayne Kuiper. I have always loved his writing, the humanity he puts into with these things, and that the personal story he puts in there is really just amazing. It's kind of nice that somebody sees these baseball players or these as people, and that's the story he tells. And he says, this is a really interesting person. Oh, and by the way, he happened to be Ted Williams, and he did some really great things. I just love the way that he approaches it, and I think that's a very Midwest sort of personality. He grew up reading somebody called, like Terry Pluto, who writes a bunch of books about Cleveland sports, including The Curse of Rocky Colavito. And you can see a lot of that in Joe Posnanski's work. And it's just, I really like that. And sometimes, like you said, it can sound like Pollyanna, but you can just see that personality and that humanity that it puts in it. And it's really nice to read those stories, because I think too often we forget that these people that play baseball for our entertainment are people.
You mentioned Terry Pluto. Make sure you read his book on the American Basketball Association. He also wrote a book about the Bouton comeback in 1978. Pluto isn't particularly proud of that book, but if you're a Jim Bouton wonk like I am, it's probably worth a read. It's findable on Amazon.
Yeah, Pluto's great. He's somebody that should be known more outside Cleveland.
For sure. He's a legend.
Renee, Baseball 100.
I haven't read it yet. It's on my list. I'm a college English teacher, so I am selective about when I read what. It's on my list for this summer when I can spend some time on it. But I read some of the essays in The Athletic, and I want to put in a plug here for Joe Posnanski's Substack. I get that, and it's really good, and it's a really nice sense of what he's doing as a writer. So let me just throw that one in. And I think the new book he just turned in, The Galleys, I think he just finished it. So I think maybe we'll see it in the fall, but I could be wrong.
And go back and read The Soul of Baseball, about when he went around with Buck O'Neill for, I think it was a year. It is just an amazing book. Buck O'Neill really opened up to him, and there's some great stories in there.
Renee, I didn't know you were a college professor. What give us one non-baseball book we should all read?
A non-baseball book you should? Well,
yeah,
so
but you just basically describe the universe and give examples.
I'm in this big library. There's a lot of books. Give me one.
All right. So the book that I carry in my backpack always with me is Annie Dillard's Best American Essays collection from I'll have to give you the exact title, but it's delightful, and it's the essay, and it covers everything. So that would be. That's
I love the way you introduced that. The book I have in my backpack. That's what I should have asked. That's the way the question should have been. I know this is a book in your backpack. What is it?
Wait, now I also want to ask Renee, what is like a book considered a classic that you're like overrated?
Oh my gosh, look homeward. If you ever go to a party with English majors, which you should never do, if you want to get into a really good conversation, ask them what great novel they say they've read that they haven't really read that they're supposed to read, right?
Oh yeah, what's the Mark Twain quote?
Well, so the one that I should have read is I've never actually read Joyce's the fourth novel that he wrote. But the one that I would get rid of is Look Homeward Angel, and it's not even close. It should just go away. Thank you.
Dude, I tried James Joyce. I cannot get past the diction. I was reading Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, and I was just like, nope. I
Start
got
with
like
Dubliners. Dubliners is good. Start with Dubliners. But
Start
like
with Dubliners.
Ulysses, I didn't make Ulysses. Don't tell people I said that.
James Fenimore Cooper made me regret learning to read. You know, it just, oh man, it made me angry.
It's
Read that guy.
Reminds me of the old. There's a Mark Twain quote where I think he says, "Where a classic is a book that everyone wants to have read and nobody wants to read."
So
And
great.
that's very true for like a lot of those books. But anyways, let's go back to baseball books. And Renee, I want to talk about a book on your list, Jeff Passan's The Arm, Inside the
love The
$1
Arm.
billion mystery of the most valuable commodity in sports. I always love a good long subtitle after
my
a
gosh.
nice quick.
I thought the subtitle is really long. This tells. I think what the arm does. So what Michael Lewis does for sort of economics, I think Passan does for biology. Right? It's this really nice book where he explains how the elbow works, how it's not designed for pitching, what happens when somebody gets Tommy John, and then he tracks a number of pitchers who've gone through this process. One of whom is Riley Pint, who's been added to the Rockies 40-man roster, right? So again, and part of this has to do. I also teach technical writing, so anytime a writer explains a complicated subject in a way that's accessible to a lot of people, I'm really interested in that. I just think this is just a little masterpiece in baseball.
Yeah, I like how you phrase that. I always think that we have this misunderstanding sometimes that great writing is flowery and it's complicated and you're reaching for your dictionary all the time. To be a great writer or great communicator, you can be engaging to the smart people in the room, but you're understood by everybody. That's what makes a writer
Yes.
good. And I always say, you know, people will say to me, not that I know anything about writing, but like, what would you say to a young writer? I'd say, well, first of all, the simplest way to say something is almost always the best. Jeff
Absolutely.
Passan and I were colleagues for a while at Yahoo. Our work very rarely overlapped, but we did see each other on a couple of offsites, and we're in a fantasy football league together. Just a really good guy. I'm overdue to read this book, but he's one of the finest baseball writers we have today, and just a guy who's very well connected. He's a mandatory follow during the off season when all the stuff is moving around, and just a really good perspective on baseball. So I'm just glad I know him, and I'm glad we have him around because he's, you know, I always ask myself, like, who's the Peter Gammons of today? And, you know, Jeff Passan might be that guy.
Yeah, it's fully agree. And I could not agree more with your point on writing simply. Like, you don't have to have super, you know, you can have super eloquent, flowery language and be effective. My favorite book series in the history of the written word is Lord of the Rings, and Lord of the Rings is very flowery and all of that. But another one of my favorite book series is the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson, which is super simple, and that's what makes it so easily readable, is that it is very straightforward. There's no like big flowery language. Both can be effective, but I agree. You don't. Thank you, Nick. Yeah. Also, shout out to Paul in the chat for putting in the Audible link to the baseball books. What a guy. That's fabulous. That Paul.
Thank
one of my
you,
favorites.
Paul.
Thank you, Paul. But yeah, I fully agree on that. All right, we are halfway through the panel, and we've got plenty more books to go. We may not get through all of them. That's okay. But speaking of Peter Gammons, Scott, what a fabulous segue. What a fabulous segue. Because on your list, you listed Peter Gammons and the Boston Globe. Are you just talking about lots of stuff that Peter Gammons wrote in the Boston Globe? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, technically not a book, although Peter Gammons has written books. But I grew up in New England, and in the 1980s, the Boston Globe had Peter Gammons, and it had Will McDonough, and it had Jackie McMullen, and it had Dan Shaughnessy before he really became a troll, and it had Bob Ryan, who's largely considered the best NBA writer of all time, Lee Montville. I go on and on and on. Just Francis Rose was a really good hockey writer. And the Globe created Gammons, you know, I want to be positive here. People talk about like Bill Simmons, like he invented pop culture and sports writing, and he stole all that stuff from the Globe. And I don't know if Gammons got it from anybody, but when Peter Gammons was writing these Sunday columns, which he pretty much invented the Sunday Notes column, he's writing about Bob Dylan and Neil Young and Warren Zevon, and he made me want to love those guys and find out about those guys. It was a history lesson and a pop culture lesson, and the writing was so smart. And Peter has such a good heart about him, and you know, he's not a negative writer. He sees the good in stories, but if something stinks, he'll tell you that too. His deadline piece for the Game 6, 1975 Carlton Fisk game. It's just immaculate that somebody could write that with time pressure and everything. So I mentioned this. It's not technically a book, although Gammons has written books. I just feel so lucky that I was a kid plopped down in the middle of this unbelievable writing hotbed, and I got to read it every day and, get out my bowl of cereal and sit on the living room floor and spread out the paper. This is back, dating myself, back when you needed to look in the paper in the next morning to see who won the games, look at the box scores and all that. No more of knowing it immediately when something happens. And, today's society is great and everything, but part of me kind of misses that day where I could wake up and have a 15-page Sunday Globe sports section to peek through. And Peter Gammon is just an American treasure.
Yeah, he's somebody else I actually had the good fortune to meet.
I hate you. I hate you.
Matt just out of here name dropping.
I hate you. One of my friends met Peter Gammons at Earth Day, and we all envied him. Growing up, me and all my friends wanted to be Peter Gammons, or either be his friend or be him.
But the best thing was in the conversation I had, and I was with the president of Sabre and somebody from the Cleveland Plain Dealer. I can't remember right now. Peter Gammon's articles were the way he talked. He talked to me about music, and we were talking baseball, and it's just his articles were him. It was his personality coming out, and he was just a lovely guy. And I found out we were the same height, so I was like, cool.
You're the same height. Is he especially tall or short?
He's especially short.
Oh, how tall is he?
About 5'6".
That is a tiny man. Yeah.
So you wanted to post him. You wanted to post him up. You think you could take him in one-on-one? Is that what we're getting with here?
He's watched enough the Celtics that he could probably beat me. So.
What Matt's saying is that he absolutely owned Peter Gammons on the court. Is what happened.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, broke the man's ankles.
Gammons and Bob Ryan, by the way, started at the Boston Globe on the same day, which is just, that's like, was it Frank Thomas and Jeff Bagwell have the same birthday? I want to say. Or how are Stan Musial and Ken Griffey and Ken Griffey Jr. all from the same hometown in Pennsylvania? Just some things just don't make any sense, but there they are.
Amazing. All right, Renee, I want to talk about a book on your list, Jackie Robinson's autobiography. I Never Had It Made. Tell me about it.
I think this is really required reading for baseball fans, right? He tells you his story. And the first half of it is about his experience as a baseball player, as being Black and breaking into baseball. And it was incredibly difficult. And then after that, he describes his life as an activist when his baseball career was over. Most of what we've had so far have been other narrators telling the stories of various athletes and people involved in baseball. This time, Jackie Robinson speaks for himself. It's never not a good time to read I Never Had It Made. And by the way, he's really he made mistakes. He owns the mistakes. It is such a moving and important book.
Jackie Robinson, man. He has a quote. One of his famous quotes is, "A life has no value other than the effect it has on other lives," which it just gives me all the goosebumps. I share a birthday with Nolan Ryan. I share a birthday with Justin Timberlake. I share a birthday with Yuniesky Betancourt, and I share a birthday.
See that. Yeah, I can see.
Yeah, you can see the Betancourt.
I see all of them.
The greatness of Betancourt is really what I'm aspiring for.
I was just thinking. I was like, later I got to tell Scott. He reminds me of
sure.
Justin Timberlake.
We also share a birthday with Jackie Robinson. It's coming up. It's next week. So I have nothing to do with Jackie Robinson. I'm just a guy who is able to come along at a time when the country needs it and has the right personality and temperament. He's not a perfect person. He admits it, but just the right man at the right time to help us be more progressive and understanding and have a better humanity. You could argue he's the most important baseball player ever.
Yeah.
And for Jackie, when I first read his autobiography, I didn't get it. But I grew up in Northeast Ohio in a very white town. Then I started doing baseball research, and I started looking about him coming into the leagues and what it went to. And I started reading what was written about him. Then I went back and reread that biography, and I was like, wow, now I really got it at that point. Just looking at the language that was used to talk about him when he was in the papers. And it wasn't New York. You had to go and look in Chicago, look in Columbus, look in Atlanta, look in these other places where, they were talking about Jackie Robinson, and you look at that language, and that's when I really got what he was writing about in those books and the mistakes he made and how he felt it really affected and might have affected how people looked at other players, and I really got it at that point. I had to be 30 years old before I got it. But reading that is really poignant. Was really poignant to me just that second time.
Also, speaking of Jackie Robinson, worth watching just to see Jackie Robinson like in a film is the Jackie Robinson story. Its movie came out in 1950. Fair warning, it's not especially good, but it is pretty cool just seeing Jackie Robinson like playing himself in a movie. But anyways, I want to move to another book on your list, Scott, and that is Stars and Strikes by Dan Epstein. Tell me about it.
Yeah, Dan Epstein's written a few baseball books. I think he wrote a book on Thurman Munson. He wrote a book on the 1970s baseball, which is just as good as this 1976 book. I have an obsession with history that I was alive for, but not really aware of. In 1976 is a season. It's the Mark Fidrich season. I wish I had experienced it in real time. I was just a little bit too young for it. And Epstein's a really funny writer. He writes a lot about what's going on with baseball, of course, in 1976, but he really captures what's going on with the zeitgeist of America and what people were concerned about, what people were excited about, how baseball and the country's tone and the pop culture of the time, how they all intersect. He's a really good guy, too. Great follow on Twitter. So any of the Dan Epstein books I would recommend. This is where I would start. But I love 70s history, and I'm a big Dan Epstein fan. It's like you're reading a Rolling Stone piece. I think he's done work for Rolling Stone. He really understands. We talked about Gambon's weaving in pop culture and sports, and Epstein does that especially well, too.
Sounds awesome. Yeah, Renee, Matt, any thoughts on the book?
I don't know this one, so I'm going to turn over to Matt.
Very cool. Yeah.
I prefer Epstein's book about Munson. I think it's done a little bit better, but then once again, Thurman Munson went to Kent State, which is near me, and it was funny when Munson passed away. It was big news in Cleveland because he was from the area, and even though he's in New York, he was big there. So I think I appreciate the book more because it was just like I really got to know. Epstein's really good about getting you to know that person, that subject you're talking about, and it was nice being able to relive that a little bit.
Yeah, Munson wanted to be traded to the Indians, and part of why he died is he had become a pilot and got a small plane, and he would on off days would fly back to Ohio. He was not made for New York. He didn't want to stay there, and he was saying, "Trade me to the Indians. Trade me to the Indians. I want to be closer to my family." So he got this pilot's license. He got this small plane. And unfortunately, one day he was practicing touch and go landings, and we lost him. I think it was October 2nd, 1979. That might have been also the first celebrity public figure death that hit me. I remember that happening and just thinking, this doesn't make any sense. He played a game like yesterday. How can this be true? I couldn't reconcile it. That somebody who was an all-star, was a 1976 MVP, I think has a borderline MVP case. He probably would have made it if he had just hung on and played the years he would have played in his 30s. But a fascinating guy. He wasn't always the most lovable person. He could be irascible and everything, but a really good player. And back in the day, now the catchers, they get 2 days off a week. Back then, Johnny Bench, Thurman Munson, Gary Carter, these guys would play 150 games a year.
Now, that's an interesting question to ask people. I'll have to remember that. What's the first celebrity death that actually affected you? That's an interesting question. Okay, Renee, a book on your list. Emma Spann's 90% of the Game is Half Mental.
I love
Tell
this
me
book.
about it.
I love this book. It is a memoir. Emma Spann, now she is an editor at The Athletic. Nobody ever talks about this book, but it's so good. And it starts out with her as a girl, and her dad's a Red Sox fan, and they moved to New Jersey. And so her dad says, we're going to be Yankees fans now. And so it sort of takes you through her evolving fandom as a Mets Yankees person. And then she goes to Yale, and eventually she gets a job writing about baseball for the Village Voice. And it is, I loved her stories. I loved her take on it as a woman who really loved sports and wasn't exactly sure where she fit with everything. And I was reading back through her book to prepare for this panel, and she was describing going into the clubhouse of the Mets and the Yankees. And I got to go into the Rockies clubhouse and sit in the press box for the first time this year. And oh my gosh, yes, she's funny. She's self-deprecating. It's just a new approach to the game. I cannot recommend this book enough.
You want to talk about writing royalty? She also married Jay Jaffe, who's done a bunch of great baseball writing, mostly about the Hall of Fame. So I believe they have at least one child. I assume that's
Yeah.
going to be like the super writer of the next generation, because obviously Emma and Jay are doing a bunch of great work.
Yeah, and
Amazing.
she is number. I've got a to read list, and she's made it to like the top 3 at this point. I have not gotten around to reading it, and I've been kicking myself, but I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, I will add that to my list as well. Scott, we're going to talk about The Bronx Zoo by Sparky Lyle. Tell me about it.
Yeah, this is a better story than it is maybe a book. It could have been another ball four. I don't think it is, but the 1978 Yankees, 1977, 78 Yankees, we talked about Munson earlier. It's a fascinating triangle between Billy Martin, the manager, getting an alcohol problem. He's probably a racist, but he's a compelling character. I make no apologies for the way he was, but he was interesting. George Steinbrenner, guy, was suspended from baseball a couple of times, buys the Yankees or as a major controlling partner in the early 70s and starts scooping up free agents. And you have Reggie Jackson, who, like so many compelling characters, is a contradiction. He's incredibly intelligent, but he's and bright and egotistical, but he's also really insecure too. There's a triangle between these 3 guys. 1978 season, the Yankees at one point are 14 games behind my beloved Red Sox. Of course, the Yankees gobble up that lead, go ahead of the Red Sox in September. Remember, the Red Sox, I think, won their last final 7 or 8 games to force the playoff. They play one of the most famous baseball games in history, a game that Gammons absolutely loves, 1-game playoff. So Sparky Lyle is on this team. He won the Cy Young Award the previous year as the Yankees closer. And back when a closer might throw 120, 130 innings, at least more than 100, the usage is so different now. I believe in the 1977 playoffs, Martin tapped on Lyle in the 5th inning of a playoff game, and Lyle pitched the rest of the way. I mean, you would never see that today. It's just the game's so totally different. But it's a good book. It's more to me a statement on, I think the Yankees of the late 70s are fascinating. And there's a lot of other literature. You could read Reggie's various autobiographies. The Bronx is Burning is a good book and was a good miniseries. Anything on the late 70s Yankees, even though I was a Red Sox fan, I was a Reggie fan, and I thought the Yankees were fascinating. Greg Nettles' book, Balls, is actually worth a read, too. It's a good book. It's not a great book, but to me, it's more about the subject matter. I'm not sure Sparky Lyle is all together the greatest guy, but this team was a fascinating group of characters.
I should note, Orioles great, Reggie Jackson. Orioles
Yes, 1976, one of the great
Orioles
all-time.
legend, Reggie Jackson.
He never looks right in that uniform, right? I mean, I just love it. I love how strange he looks for that 1 year he plays in Baltimore.
There are a lot of greats who have worn Orioles uniforms, and they look like Sammy Sosa. That look bizarre in those uniforms. Also, to answer Paul's question in the chat, Bucky Dent home run was 1978. Yeah, that's
October 2nd, 1978. Bucky freaking Dent. Mike Torres hung a slider. Red Sox were ahead 2-0. Reggie hit scored the final Yankee run that day with a blast off Bob Stanley to center field. And then Piniella makes the great play in right field where he lost track of the ball, but he pretended he had a beat on it and just like stabbed out at it in the sun. Don't let anybody tell you that Fenway Park left field is the hard place to play. It's right field is the sun field. It's got all the acreage. That's why I like Mookie Betts, Dwight Evans. I can never give them enough credit for winning Gold Gloves in Fenway Park and right field. It's impossible. But Lou Piniella, who couldn't cover more than a blanket at the beach, makes the key play in that game. It's a fascinating game. They show it on MLB Network every once in a while. I'm sure you can probably get it on YouTube. It's a really fun game, even though my team lost.
I remember as a teenager going to, I think I was like 12 or 13, going to an Orioles Red Sox game. And that was a time in the 2000s when, the Orioles were really bad. And so there was way more Red Sox fans at Camden Yards than there were Orioles fans. And I thought it would be very funny to bring a sign that just said Bucky Dent is my hero and hold it up all of the time and like do pictures of Bucky Dent on there. And, I definitely got some comments from some people who were like, what are you...
The Red Sox won 99 games and didn't make the playoffs. Baseball was so different then. They were the second best team in baseball.
Any way to hear any stories about the Red Sox failing, I'm here for it. So I love to hear that. And the Yankees too. Because they'll
do plenty of failing this year, unless you think Adam Duvall is going to hit 40 home runs.
Sure hope so. That's one of those things. Like, I hate the Red Sox. I'm sorry, Scott. I really do. But one thing that I always have in common with Red Sox fans is like, hey, we both hate the Yankees too. So, we got that. Okay, we got 13 minutes left in this panel, roughly, and I don't think we're going to get through all these books, but like I said, I will tweet out the full list so that everyone has them. But I want to talk about a book on your list, Renee, actually an essay, Roger Angle's The Summer Game. Tell me about it.
Roger, so in this way, this is going to sound like an unusual connection. Emma Spann and Roger Angel are very much the same. They are looking at baseball from the perspective of a fan, and they grow into a more journalistic place. But Angel is one of the great voices of baseball. He covered it for the New Yorker, but he says in the beginning of The Summer Game, he decided the best possible place for him to cover a baseball game was in the fans. And so anytime somebody is navigating fandom in baseball, I'm really engaged with that. You just can't go wrong with Roger Angel. I mean, again, talk about literary great, right? I mean, E.B. White, But at any rate, I recommend the whole collection, but I had to pick one, so I went with The Summer Game.
Sounds super good. Matt, it seems like you're familiar with it.
Oh, he's just a wonderful writer. If he would have chosen to write about, I think, rocks and the beach, he would just made it compelling. I really appreciate the fact that he wrote about baseball, and for so long, and there's so much out there. Like I said, he's a fan of baseball, and that comes out in his words. And you miss that a little bit in a lot of people that write these days. You don't know if they're like baseball or not. It's their job. And you knew it was his job, but just that passion that comes out. And I really like that. I've read his books and his writings over and over again, just in hope that maybe somehow it'll make me smarter or a better writer.
Yeah, just a wonderful writer. We lost him last year. He lived to be 101. I thought Roger Angel was going to live forever, 101's a pretty full life, and maybe we all have one day writing as well as he wrote for his entire life.
Yeah.
Matt, did you get to meet him? You've met everyone else.
I know.
No, I didn't meet him.
He only lived to be 101, Matt, so I don't know how you missed out on that one. He probably wanted to buy you a beer too.
The Society of American Baseball Research used to be based in Cleveland, Ohio, and I knew the director and things like that of there. So whenever there was an event, I used to show up. So I had the opportunity to meet a bunch of people because I knew somebody. Was the most part. So
you had plenty of time. The man lived to 101, Matt. He was waiting.
I
was waiting
lazy.
for you, and he just like, look, I can't wait any longer to meet
I
Matt.
sent him
101 years.
I sent him an email, but he didn't have email. It was regular.
All right, Scott, I want to talk about a book on your list, the Bill James Historical Baseball Abstract. Tell me why it's on your list.
Yeah, Bill James, father of sabermetrics, father of trying to solve the game ahead of his time. Nobody wanted to read him. Nobody wanted to hire him. Nobody wanted to pretend he existed. So he's a hero to us because he's self-published. He became a self-made writer, right? Like, I'm going to put this thing out. I'm going to publish it myself. I'll sell 28 copies or 40 copies. It doesn't matter. So he puts out the Bill James baseball abstracts and all that. And I just could have said Bill James. He's smart. He's got a lot of interesting theories. Some of them hold up. Some of them don't. And he's a peculiar bird. He's an interesting guy. He's certainly an eccentric, but a marriage, I think we all know with baseball, if you want to analyze baseball smartly, it's going to be a mixture of observation and scouting with stat analysis. But when you're trying to get the stat stuff down, I think Bill James is as good a foundational place to go as any. And as I said, I'm a history buff, so I love his take on the historical importance and significance of the game.
Bill James also a very chaotic and strange Twitter follow.
He's a strange dude. I think he would even try to tell you that.
Yeah. Okay. Renee, let's talk about Chad Harbach's The Art of Fielding.
I was really worried we were going to get through this and not talk about fiction at all. And I didn't want to really talk about the natural because I'm not wild about it. If you haven't read The Art of Fielding, it's a novel. It's set in a liberal arts school in it's Westish in Wisconsin. Shortstop is this genius. He comes out of South Dakota. It's got Melville in it. It's got baseball in it. It's just a great book. And I reread. I was rereading it yesterday. Great passage on bunting. I just can't recommend this one enough.
And if we want to go with fiction, there's actually a novelization by George Plimpton of the history of Sid Finch. It's about 120 pages long. It's actually really well done. It is written in that 70s tell-all model type thing, and they did publish that. It's hard to find though.
I
Yeah.
read the Sid Finch story as a kid and believed it, which not a proud moment.
Matt's best friend, Sid Finch. Very close.
Yeah, I wrote an article where he relayed his story of talking to Bob Feller on
I
Pitcher List.
mean, look, we're just swinging in the dark and we hit it. All right, Scott, I want to talk about, you put on your list the Elias Baseball Analyst 1988 edition. Tell me why what sounds super boring is on your list.
Well, that's really it's a tie-in with James. It's
Yeah.
looking at the book, looking at baseball through the numbers, through sabermetrics and everything. I believe that's the first edition of the book I bought. Bought it several years in a row. It's just this is before fantasy baseball for me. Fantasy baseball did exist in the late 80s. I didn't start playing it until the early 90s. But I was trying to figure out, what is it worth it to steal bases? Is relief pitching optimized? How valuable would the best fielding shortstop be if he only hit 190? Stuff like that. And basically, Elias picked up the baton from where Bill James ran the first leg, maybe the second leg too, and then Elias picked up the baton and said, "Let's put our swing on this." And it's just really smart writing that interweaves what the numbers mean about baseball and how we can be smarter about trying to analyze it and pick our teams better or whatever it is.
So why the 1988 edition?
That's just the first one I bought, I believe.
Oh, just the first one you bought.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, we got 6 minutes, and I have a before we finish, I have a non-baseball question I want to ask you, guys. So we're gonna do one more. Renee, Howard Bryant's Ricky.
I really wanted to talk about this. I think Howard Bryant is one of the most important writers we have in America right now. Ricky is a great biography because what Bryant is doing is he's testing what the record shows against the stories that Ricky Henderson saw. But it's really the story of America, right? It's about the migration. It's about redlining. It's about all of those. It's about America. I can't recommend anything by Howard Bryant, but I decided for this one, I would use his biography of Ricky Henderson.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like how Bryant basically, like you said, told a story about America using Ricky Henderson. Because Henderson is just a unique person. It's read as much as you can about him. Anybody that talks to about himself in the third person is awesome. But the way Brian put that together and put that book together, it really was like, wow, I wish I would have thought of this. This is great.
I love Ricky Henderson. I love how he and Ken Stabler were both born on Christmas Day. A couple of Oakland lefties. And there's a story of a million great Ricky Henderson stories. One I'll mention really quickly is, I think he was on the Mets. I forget what team he was on. They were voting for playoff shares. And some of the ancillary people associated with the baseball club were coming up, and he would just yell out, "Full share, full share, full share, clubhouse boy, full share." And he's like, "You changed somebody's life with this money. Full share, full freaking share." And that just tells you who Ricky Henderson is. Even the apocryphal stories about Ricky Henderson, like the Ricky Henderson, John Olerud story, which you just look it up if you want, but it's not true, but I want to believe it's true. I love everything about Ricky Henderson.
One of my favorite bizarre baseball injury stories is Ricky Henderson getting frostbite in the middle of August because he fell asleep with an ice pack on his foot and missed a few games with frostbite.
Should have won the 1981 MVP too. The MVP voting is so much better now because we've kind of like made it into a peer pressure rundown of the war leaders. But back in 1981, Raleigh Fingers won the MVP over Ricky and Dwight Evans. It doesn't make sense. I spent so much time on Baseball Reference looking at these crazy awards that we used to give out.
Since they stopped ignoring the RBI, it's been better.
Yeah, you can say so.
All right, I'm going to read off just real quick. I'm going to read off the rest of the list, and like I said, I'll tweet out the list. So if you missed it, that's okay. On Renee's list, we didn't get a chance to talk about, but we have John Hellier's Lords of the Realm. We've got David Moranis's Clemente, and John Thorne's Baseball in the Garden of Eden. And on Scott's list, we didn't get a chance to talk about the Complete Handbook of Baseball, 1981 edition, Encyclopedia Brown, and The Case of the Secret Pitch by Donald Sobel, The Teammates by David Halbertson, Halberstam, thank you, The Last Boy, Mickey Mantle, and the End of America's Childhood, and Wise Guy Baseball by Gene McCaffrey.
And can I add just one that I think everybody should read?
Please do.
Book by the name of David Block. It's called Baseball Before We Knew It. He spent and researched all the way, and he found references to batted ball games in Egypt back when they were building the pyramids. It's an amazingly well-researched book about how baseball may have came up, and the conclusion is basically kids had sticks and rocks, and they invented baseball. For the most part, that's the part of it. But it's amazing how far it goes back, and it's worth the read, and it's well researched.
I also want to apologize to anybody who I know from Scrabble. I used to be a tournament Scrabble player before I switched to other things. So many Scrabble people have written books. Peter Morris, D.B. Firstman. I go on and on. There's like 8 or 9 people. The guy who wrote Field of Dreams was a Scrabble player. Kinsella, John Robertson, Carl Madden. I'm forgetting a bunch of people. So a lot of great books have been written by Scrabble players. I have great baseball books. I don't know if you knew that.
Okay, one last really quick question. I want the first thing that pops in your head, because we've got like 2 minutes left. I want a non-baseball book that you think everybody should read. This can be, like I said, first thing that pops in your head. This can be a classic. You can say Moby Dick if you want or whatever. It doesn't matter. But what I want to hear is the first thing that pops in your head, a non-baseball book that you think everybody should read. Whoever's got it.
Anything by Murakami.
Sorry, say that again.
Anything by Murakami.
Okay.
Music Lesson by Victor Wooten.
Okay. All right, Renee.
I'm going to go with Jeff Tweedy's How to Write One Song.
Jeff Tweedy, you're speaking to my heart there. Oh my!
I got to hear him talk about it last spring. It was great.
Yeah,
and it's a great book. It's a great book.
Ben, you can't just be the moderator. You got to give us a book too.
Okay.
That's right.
I will. Yeah. So, for baseball books, the one I've read most recently that I loved was the MVP Machine. I feel like everybody read it when it came out, but it is a fabulous book. You have to, dance around all the Trevor Bauer in there, but hey, it's a super fascinating look at the way teams develop baseball players. So, loved that. For a regular book that I think everybody should read, I recently read Caves of Steel by Isaac Asimov. I'm a huge science fiction fan, and I love film noir, and Caves of Steel is a marriage of both of those things. It is a murder mystery detective story, is set in the iRobot universe that Isaac Asimov creates, where a cop has to partner with a robot to solve a murder. And it is a fascinating, super cool read. And he has a whole series of books of those two. So I would strongly recommend that. If you're into murder mysteries and science fiction, it's my 2 favorite things mixed together.
Yeah,
So,
I'm not a huge science fiction guy, but The Dead Zone by Stephen King is a fantastic read. It's also a chillingly poignant and relevant today movie that came out in the early 80s. That will creep you the F out. It's so good. So I can't recommend The Dead Zone enough.
and also, as I said earlier, I mean, in my opinion, The Lord of the Rings is the greatest thing ever written in the English language. So all of the Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and then if you're into like the lore and you don't mind reading what feels like a textbook, The Silmarillion, and then there's other stuff of regular stories, Unfinished Tales, Children of Hurin, all that good stuff. But yeah, if you're into fantasy, obviously, I mean, you got to read all of that and digest all of it because it's incredible. And then ignore the Hobbit movies because they're bad. Don't. You know what? Nick hasn't interrupted us yet, so I'm gonna.
No. That was really kind. You had a nice thing going.
I was going to talk about movies that are better than the book, like the Ice Storm.
Yeah,
Jaws.
that's a very rare thing to happen. But anyway,
Godfather.
Ben, Scott, Matt, Renee, thank you all so much for joining today. This was great. I'm going to be looking back at this one and probably bothering all of you for those book recommendations.
This was fun.
Honestly,
Thanks for having us.
Alex Fast regretted that he wasn't able to join this panel as well. And Matt, I'm very happy that you were able to come in and be an addition. And I'm really excited to hear about all the other people that you have met and talked to. I hope you have an article that's literally just like, yes, I've met this person.
Yeah, name dropping.
Oh,
with
then
Matt.
I met this person too. You don't say anything about you meeting them. Just
Can I do it one more? When Joe Posnanski got his SI cover for Greinke, he was at a Sabre convention and I was there having a beer with him.
Oh, there you
Zach
go.
Greinke?
There it is.
Have you ever met Nick Pollock?
Why would you want to?
He hasn't. He has yet to meet Nick Pollock.
Or the other one that was an author that wrote some books that is from San Francisco.
My goal in life is to become the only Nick Pollock on Google.
Yeah.
You know, you can't
Yeah.
even find the other people. No,
That's not a
At
problem
the
I have.
pitcher list.
but anyway, no, really, guys, thank you so much for being a part of this. This is such a wonderful addition to PitchCon and a fantastic conversation. Thank you for taking the time on this
Thank
Saturday
you.
to be
Yeah.
here.
Thanks, everybody.